Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study. Today is Saturday, December 2nd, 2017. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent in Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And today our moderator is Luann from New York.
My thoughts are in New Jersey most of the time.
I know.
Luann, you're welcome to visit anytime.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's start off by reading a quote from No and Yes by Mary Baker Eddy. As dutiful descendants of Puritans, let us lift their standard higher, rejoicing, as Paul did, that we are freeborn. Man has a noble destiny, and the full orb significance of this destiny has dawned on the sick bound and sin enslaved. For the unfolding of this upward tendency to health, greatness, and goodness, I shall continue to labor and wait.
Thank you very much. Beautiful.
What greater purpose could anybody have?
Exactly it.
Our topic this morning is Abram and Lot. The readings were from Genesis 12, 13, and 14. Our first question, where is the plain of Jordan located, and where is the plain of Mamre located?
So who has a Google map?
Besides Jeremy.
I made extras.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
It doesn't clearly show where those planes are, though. I tried finding one that did. So, pretty good, though.
I did Google, and it said north of the Sea of Jordan is north of the Sea of Galilee, within boundaries of Israel, and forms the western boundary of the Golden Heights. South of the lake, it forms the border between the kingdom of Jordan to the east and Israel to the west. And Mamre, full Hebrew name is Elani Mamre. But how do you pronounce that? Marmy? It looks like M-A-R-M-E, not
Mamre.
Mamre.
Yeah, Mamre. Yeah, it was misspelled on the question.
It was misspelled on the question.
Oh, and it was shrine to
I think it's called
Mamre.
Memory.
Memory? Thank you, Tom.
There we go.
Mamre. And it was originally focused on a single holy tree belonging to Canaan. One of the three most important fairs or marketplaces. It lies approximately halfway between Talu and historic Hebron. Which one was that? That was the plain of
Memory.
Well, you all should know that you should all have an answer to this. So if you don't volunteer, we're going to start calling on people. If anyone has any more than what Sharon just said. You said south of the lake. What did you mean? South of the lake? No, it said south of the lake. It forms the lake, L-I-K-E. Yes, it forms the border between the kingdom of Jordan. Jeremy?
No. Well, I don't know. I read multiple things about where it could be, but it from what I saw is Abram and Lot came up around the north and then went down south, and it looked from what I was reading that the plains were to the west of the Dead Sea, and then around that area. So,
Both of them?
yeah, like plain that Abram went on is farther west away.
Right.
May I? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead,
hilly
Charlie.
area. Whereas
All right,
the
if you,
more of the flat area closer to the Dead Sea, right?
That's what the maps that I look at.
Okay, Shardy.
if you look at a picture, I looked at a map in the Bible at the Dead Sea, and the Abram and Lot finally moved, up to what they call the south. Well, memory that I have is it's near Hebron, and if you look, you'll see Hebron on a map. And then if you go over to the west of the Dead Sea, and it's not the southern part, it's all the southern part of the Dead Sea, and then you'll see Sodom and Gomorrah, and that's where where Lot ended up. And then further up on the west is Hebron, and that looks like where Abram chose. And it looked pretty mountainous too. It wasn't real good grazing ground.
Exactly.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the point of this is the plain of Jordan. I read it was supposed to be the deepest valley in the world. It was, fertile soil. It had a water supply. It was one of the key agricultural areas near the Dead Sea, while the other plain of memory, or whatever it's called, wasn't nearly as nice.
Yeah, so to put it simply, is the plain of Mamre is to the west of the Dead Sea, and the plain of Jordan would be to the east of the Dead Sea. So the plain of Mamre was then what later became the kingdom of Judah, and then for the plain of Jordan, later became the countries of Moab and Ammon, which were settled by descendants of Lot, which are now part of Jordan. So I think it was probably in the land of Moab, what later became Moab, which is really Lot's descendants. And for the plain of Mamre, some said that was near Hebron, and that's interesting because that's where the tomb of the patriarchs is, and it's kind of thought that that's where Abraham was buried.
Okay.
Well, the thing about the plain of Jordan is that it was very lush and everything, but Sodom and Gomorrah were there, and they turned out not to be very desirable.
Absolutely.
Well, it was really lush, and that's why so many people wanted it. Probably did Abram a great favor not being there.
And they look like wonderful cities.
So, something I didn't realize when I was there, but I was in Jordan. We were driving by, and someone said, "Well, up there in that mountain is where Lot is buried. It's on some mountain overlooking the Dead Sea, which is on the east side that we're talking about for the plain of Jordan." So it's interesting that they think that Lot is buried there, near the plain of Jordan, and Abraham is buried in the plain of Mamre. Where else?
Where else? Right.
Luann, you have anything you want to say?
No, I was looking on the map of the 12 tribes in the back of the Bible, and it said that they came to Zor, which is at the very southern tip of the Dead Sea, and Lot, when you look towards the east. So you can see on the map where there's like a green area on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, and that would be the Valley of the Jordan, or the Plain of the Jordan. And Hebron, Mamre is near Hebron. So it gives you kind of a clearer picture if you look at that map of the 12 tribes. That's all. That's how I found it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, question number 2. Why did Abram and Lot separate?
But their substance was too great. That's verse 13. Chapter 13:6. And then their husbands started fighting with each other.
Well, the other part of that, too, was that the land was not able to bear them because their substance was so great in the...
Yeah, they separated to avoid conflict, didn't they?
Well, they were having conflict already, so they separated not to maybe continue the conflict. So they all got their heads, they all got too successful. They had too much, and obviously the land couldn't contain both their property, their animals and so on, because it said that they had to go some ways to get the pasture that the animals needed. So I'm sure then they started the contention among the headsmen. So.
Now, we also know in the readings we had for the Bible today that when Abram and Lot came back from Egypt, they had a lot. A lot of goods, a lot of animals, but then they had a lot of animals. So they had to feed the animals, So they were rich in abundance. And where they were, it was just not enough, grazing and land for all the wealth that they had. They had too much.
Well, they weren't the only ones there. There were Canaanites and parasites there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
That too, yes.
And not only that, they were there before Abram and Lot showed up.
Yeah, they didn't really own that land.
And
But it shows, too, sometimes an abundance of wealth in families is a source of contention. People start arguing and fighting about it. But think about all of this. First of all, what was Abram told to do, if we backtrack a few chapters?
To leave his family behind.
Yeah.
Yes, he was told to leave his family behind. Who was Lot?
His nephew.
Nephew?
And so how did he sneak in?
How in the heck did he get there?
Maybe he liked him too much, couldn't leave him behind.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to me to think about that as to why. Maybe for those of us who have had to separate from your family, because you're moving on in science and there's just been differences. If there's one that respects and loves science, it's like, wow, this is great. You can come be part of this. That could be why. Maybe Lot was very respectful of Abram. Or maybe he had a huge personal sense of Lot.
Well, maybe it's that Abram didn't bring Lot, but that Lot made the journey, too.
Yeah, that he just decided to go with Abram.
I think that with my dad. He can come down, but I'm not going up.
Well, that's true. And what did Abram do for Lot after all of this? What had just happened? We read about this in the story of Melchizedek.
He rescued him.
He did. He rescued Lot.
Saved his life.
He did.
Yeah.
And really far, too. That map doesn't have miles on it, but it looks gigantic. And they came back down through Jerusalem and all that. So he went really far to get them.
I got such a sense that Abram just loved Lot.
But
he
wasn't
didn't.
he so loyal because
meant.
he was his brother's son, and since his brother was dead or had been killed, didn't he feel like a sense of loyalty a lot transferred that in a sense of love, and also maybe he was the son he never had.
Absolutely.
I believe
he,
all of
he
it's true.
took him under his wing as if he were his own son.
He had a great love for Lot. He saved him with 318 men, traveled all that distance.
Travel in those days was basically either on the back of an animal or by foot.
Yes.
So it was slow going to get there, no doubt. And a long distance for the means of travel.
That's right. They didn't have bicycles then.
From water to water.
Right.
So we talked about why did Abram and Lot separate. I thought it was interesting too in chapter 13, verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land which thou seest to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. But he said that after what?
He obeyed him.
After they separated.
After they separated.
Yeah.
And whose idea was it to separate?
Abraham.
Yeah.
I'm getting into this mainly because it teaches us all here lessons about personal sense and obedience to God.
Family relationships.
And family relationships, yes. And to see Abram, in every turn, he was so loving to Lot. So,
Well, I think in Abram's eyes, they were together, and in Lot's, they were separate. 'Cause obviously, they weren't really together if there was all this strife.
Well, I think that's part of the thing here is God was taking care of Abram, and Abram knew that. And Abram trusted God to take care of him. And as a result, Abram was very well taken care of. Lot went along for the ride. Abram loved him. Lot saw the benefit of Abram's obedience to God and faith in God. And here there was conflict. The conflict was not a demonstration. The conflict was somebody had to learn a lesson here. Lot had to grow up.
I'm sure a lot of the abundance he enjoyed was due to Abram, don't you think?
Maybe all of it.
Yeah.
It's clear one of the lessons is you
and
can't...
going back to what I said before about all the wealth they had when they came back from Egypt, it's kind of interesting that think about how that might relate to us, like, oh, if I only had all this stuff, life would be better. And so here they are. They have tremendous wealth, but it's not working out. Mm-hmm. So if we get all these things that we want, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to mean everything's okay. I think that's what Abram and Lot found themselves in,
And I wonder, how did he get the wealth? Was it because of Sarai, his wife in Egypt? Wasn't he given tremendous wealth from the Pharaoh?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, when he let him go, yeah.
Yeah. And because he lied, really, he said that Sarah was his sister, and then he had to leave, but he was given tremendous wealth because really it was because of Sarah, his wife. The Pharaoh loved her. And so I think he gave Abram the wealth, but then when he found out the truth, he said, you must leave, and he took all of the things that he was given with him, the animals and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really because of Sarah, in a sense. And it was, it's a very material wealth. And when Lot saw the plain of Jordan, he was looking with his material sense also, and didn't consider the sinners there, and he would get wrapped into that and end up getting captured. And so when you follow the material senses, it kind of gets you wrapped up into the wrong thing, I guess.
Well, maybe this is where we find them separating.
Okay, yeah, we're certainly going to get into all of these.
Yeah, Lot.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent summary of the time in Egypt and the material wealth they got. Thank you.
But to quote Matthew Henry, though it is hard for a rich man to get to heaven, yet it is not impossible. Abram was very rich and yet very religious. Nay, his piety is a friend to outward prosperity. So outward prosperity, well managed, is an ornament to piety and furnishes an opportunity of doing so much the more good. So Abram used it was a material wealth, but he was a very spiritual person, and he used it on a spiritual basis rather than squandering it on a material basis.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, let's understand here. Well, Abram was taken care of because he had a deep, close relationship with God, and he obeyed God. There was a famine. He was told to go to Egypt to save his life, and he did. And he had the wisdom to know that he had to lie about his wife Sarah in order to save their lives, or at least save his life. So he was given what he needed to survive, and he prospered.
And when he met Melchizedek, he gave a tenth of all of that to him, as we talked about a few weeks ago. He saw who and what that Christ was, and everywhere Abram went, he built a what?
Altar.
Altar.
An altar.
To God. God was an ever-present reality to Abram, and he was abundantly blessed.
And he was, and this was pretty early in the history of mankind, as far as we know. And that faithfulness of Abraham was going to be the basis of a nation. He was going to have a lot of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they needed a lot of animals to survive. So this was God working out a plan. This was God's love for mankind.
Yeah, it was all God working.
They looked up the different names. I didn't think to look up Sarai and Sarah, but Abram comes from Peniel, bow the knee, and means high father. And Abraham means father of a multitude, and Lot means a veil, a covering.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
I think that this whole ordeal, this whole journey that God put Abram on was a call to come out and be separate. And it seemed like Abram was catching up to God's promise all the time. Like it was unfolding to him as he went along, and he was trusting in that unfoldment of God's idea.
Thank you.
That's a lovely thought.
Very good thought.
And isn't that a good lesson for us? To trust each day to God and let each day unfold rather than try to plan it out well ahead of time?
It's the lesson for us.
Yeah. He was making mistakes, but he was learning from them. He was holding on to what he was learning, and he was growing. Every time he made a mistake, he would grow from it. But the first call was, what I found was, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. So that's why God called him out of there, to go start a new land, a new nation. So in order to do that, Abram had to develop this relationship with God, and this whole journey is his development of this relationship. God promised him the land.
That's excellent.
Very good.
Yeah, that's exactly
Thank you,
right.
Elaine.
Yes, thank you. And
So
that is
I want to say it's interesting how you think about how Abram talked with Lot about each going their own way and making a decision, because things aren't working out, and so if you sort of think of human nature, I mean, how many times have I won't speak for others, but you're sort of like in a place that's not good, and you think you should do something different, and so you almost act out, or you're angry, or you justify what you do to make a change or to make a break. And there's none of that with Abram. Obviously, he decided that they should go their separate ways, but he did it in a very loving way. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm mad at you. Pick which place you want and then get out of here."
exactly, yes,
He
right.
didn't read any of that.
I'm sure he was listening to God too, God's direction, what to do.
But
Yeah.
I think that's a lesson that can help us every day when we think about that. Sometimes we happen, I don't know, what the heck? I mean, you're at a restaurant with a bunch of people, and for some reason the conversation goes in a way that's very unpleasant. And do we get in a huff and say, "Okay, I'm going to walk out of here"? Is
Well,
that how
right.
Abram treated Lot?
Right before this, Abram went back to the altar that he had made when he first started out on his journey to leave his home. He went onto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first, and he called on the name of the Lord. And I think that's very important to his procedure with Lot, and to the fact that he let Lot choose. I mean, he was led by God.
Absolutely, thank you.
Sure.
And what do you think the answer is to Tom's question? What makes the difference between dealing with a difficult situation with poise and kindness, or dealing with it by getting into a huff?
Well, you have to turn to God.
It's your relationship with God, the consistency of knowing that God is with you, that He is the one you rely on. He is the one who has the wisdom that guides you. And if you trust that, then you lean on Him, not on your own human analysis or human reasoning of what you should do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think also the answer is in the responsive reading: "Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good."
Thank you.
Because I know I've been many times, somebody's done something wrong, bad, whatever, and then I've got to respond with some of the more. If I do that, then I'm overcome with the evil. But to know that God's resolution for everything is at hand, and to trust Him, and stay in that listening mode instead of responding to whatever the wrong deed was, maintains your poise with God, and maintains your connection with this omnipresent good God. And therefore, He will open the way for a resolution in His own way.
And how did Abraham feel about Lot?
He loved him.
He loved him. He loved him with a love that couldn't be shaken.
And that always
He was led to know that this was the right thing to do for himself and for Lot.
Yeah.
But what led him was love. Love is what leads. Love inspires, designates, and leads the way. The love has to be there to get the direction. You know, I liked what Tom said, maybe it was last week, about long suffering, that it means to just take a pause. If something unpleasant comes your way, not to react in anger or hate, but to take a pause before you, and get rid of personal sense, get rid of reaction. So then you do the right thing. You handle things with a sense of graciousness. You know, recently, I don't know if any of you know this, but on one of the YouTubes, we had a very kind of unpleasant comment. Yeah, so in answering it, I thought about what Tom had said, and to wait and make sure we weren't answering in anger, and we wrote this person a direct, very direct answer, very honest answer, but out of love. And he replied almost immediately and took the correction. And so in other words, it diffused what might have been a nasty situation. It defanged it. You must always remember in dealing with people and difficult situations that you do is that as lovingly as possible, wisely and graciously. Remember the story of David and Abigail, and how David was going to react because Abigail's husband Nabal had treated him so badly, and he was ready to go chop his head off, and it was Abigail who restrained him and diffused what could have been an ugly situation. And what Tom said last week was about this personal sense and reacting. It can lead to wars.
And as a result of that, David was grateful to her for doing that, because she kept David from doing something that he would have regretted. And he knew it, and he thanked her for it. And then he married her.
He liked her so much. So anyway, there's very, very important lesson to apply here to ourselves. Abram, again, he was always acting from a standpoint of love.
Yeah, thank you for that about the long suffering, because I was thinking after that the opposite of long suffering is, having a short temper.
Short fuse.
Short fuse.
Yeah.
So then the short fuse, when you said defuse, that
yeah, right.
all around.
No, it's true. It was a very excellent explanation of long suffering. I thank you, Tom. We should have it in some kind of an article or something. It was very good.
Yeah, it was a really good point.
Very good point.
Okay.
Are we ready?
Moving on.
I just wanted to say I quickly looked up Sarai, and it says Abraham's wife from 8269, and the person was very perceptive, because the definition is a head person of any rank or class, captain, chief, general, governor, keeper, lord, master, prince, ruler, steward. So that was her attributes.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to number 3. Or is there any more?
Well, I was just going to say that I think Abraham had such a liberated sense of possession and abundance, because it seems that the reason people fight over things is a sense that there isn't enough to go around. There's not enough good to go around. There's a limited amount of good, just as there appeared to be a limitation to that land because there was too much stuff on it. So it created a fight. But Abram saw above it, and he was like, there is enough good for everyone, and you can't lose by giving. Like, giving does not impoverish us. He knew that if he gave Lot a choice of where to go, there would be enough good that no matter what, there would be enough abundance for everyone. It's like a law of the universe that so many people can't seem to understand. That's why they're so fighting over stuff, because they think there's not enough good to go around, or there's infinite good.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Abraham was a good scientist, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
He was.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you do or not have what God wants for you?
And he was following the principles of and the laws of the universe. And that led to an abundance.
Exactly. Yeah.
When I was reading this stuff before, what came to my mind was Jesus' statement in his parable, the prodigal son, at the end where it says, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine." I just got this sense that Abram had that proximity to God, and he just trusted that concept.
He did.
Absolutely.
I think he also knew that Lot wasn't at the same plane as he was, and sometimes you have to love enough to let them go on their own too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
It's a good segue into the next.
Yeah, I think that kind of answers the question with some of it. Why did Abram allow Lot to choose where to go? And I put allow because he was obviously head over Lot. He had more authority than Lot, but he allowed him to choose.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
I feel God was directing Abram, and that he was very loving, and he didn't want to just tell him what to do.
And why?
Lot needed to learn his own lessons.
Yes. He needed to give Lot the opportunity to be responsible for his own actions, to bear the consequences of his own decisions, and to establish thereby his own relationship with God, instead of riding on Abram's coattails.
I think he didn't want to give Lot the opportunity to come back and say, "You gave me the worst piece of land, too." You know? But it was your choice.
It's why, in the rule for motives and acts, we're told not to influence erroneously. As a practitioner, we always have to know you don't tell a patient what to do. You have to turn them to God. You're infringing on their right as a child of God. And that's true with all our dealings. And Abram, as Suzanne explained so beautifully, he had great trust in God in the abundance of good. If he hadn't, he would have been worried, and he would have chosen the better land for himself and yelled at Lot and given him the worst piece. But Abram was totally poised in God. But we must, as far as possible, not try to dictate or tell anyone what to do. It's always good. It's always good when we can with our children to let them make their own decisions and decide. And as Gary just said, they learn from their mistakes then. Otherwise, it's this sense of resentment. Well, you told me to do that, and that didn't work out. And
Except to tell them to listen to God.
that's the big except.
Exactly.
You tell them to ask God what the right solution is.
I thought this was a great lesson for anybody who has children or has people working for them in any way.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say it's also a great talent to recognize where the good is coming from, and though they both had pretty much the same experience, Abram knew that the good came from God, not from the land. So he had enough experience on the trip already to know that it didn't matter where he went, if he went with God, that everything would be fine.
Great point. Yes, very good. He depended on God, not on how fertile the land was. He had such huge trust in God.
That's why that beautiful, I think it's Hebrews 11, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And it goes into all that Abraham had faith in God for. I love that chapter.
How many of us let our children make their own decisions and live with the consequences? It's tempting, isn't it, to want to tell your children what to do? You know?
And people often do try to. I know people who, if they want a son to go into a certain profession, they push them to go into it.
Yeah, I mean, children get to an age where it's right and normal for them to find their own way and not be told where to go or what to do.
When they are in your home, though, up to a certain age, you absolutely have rules and things that they have to obey. That would be foolish not to do that.
I'm just thinking of when they get to the point where they're going to be moving out on their own.
Absolutely.
When they're adults, they should be treated as adults and not children. Yeah.
Yes. You're absolutely right in that, Fairly. I wasn't contradicting what you said. For adults, you have to let them go and make their decisions. And for the most part, when they're in your home, as much as you can, yes, but you don't let them do anything too foolish, not while they're in your home. Mrs. Evans always said, as long as a child is in your home, they should go to church. They should be learning about God. They have to go to other schools. Why shouldn't they have to learn about the Bible and God? Fortunately, today, it's hard to find a good church to go to. But you can teach them. They don't have a church to attend.
They can go online to ours.
And they can certainly go online to ours.
I was just thinking about that. Even when kids are little and you have to tell them what to do, it's still their choice whether to do it happily or not. So
Yeah.
they still have a choice.
That's true.
I thought Go ahead.
No, I'm just feeling more and more that it's also very good to, as early as we can, teach them that they can hear God, because children are so receptive. And I'm sure there's a story where someone had taught their little, I think he was maybe 5 or something, to listen to God, and something was happening during the night when the little girl was sleeping, and she could hear, to get off the bed, and she did, and that saved her. And the mother asked her, "Well, how did you do that?" She said, "I heard God talking to me." So I think, we can't assume, they can hear God. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, that we have to make certain choices for them and all. But my point is that how beautiful is it to teach them as early as possible that they can hear God.
Thank you. Thank you, Florence. It's the best thing you can ever do for them.
And they are receptive at a very early age. You teach them correctly, and if you're an example.
And that way, when they get older, when they are on their own, it won't be a brand new thing for them.
Right.
I know for myself, when Jordan was here, that there was a lot of times when I tell him to think about the choices that he's making and listen to his conscience, to try to make sure he understands what this choice is going to bring him. I know, like, every time he got in the car, every time he went with his friends, before he went out the door, I always said, Jordan, think about your choices. When you get out there with your friends, think about what you're doing and think about the choice that you're going to make and what's it going to get you. And, so sometimes he makes the right choices, sometimes he doesn't, but at least he has that information in his head to consult his conscience whenever he's going to make a choice.
Thank you.
Good counsel.
Yeah.
We go on to number 4?
I think so.
Sure.
When Lot separated from Abram, what did he base his choice upon?
when I was thinking about this question, for me, I thought it was a very interesting indication, even to Abram, where Lot's thought was, because there was no spiritual sense about the neighbors he was going to have. He clearly didn't realize that all the good he was getting was from the relationship Abram had with God. Otherwise, he would say, no, I don't want to part from you. I want to be with you. Let's work this out or teach me. There was none of that, and he was attracted to the materialism, which was really going to weigh Abram down. So that shows the spiritual unfoldment that was going for Abram here to let this go. And I thought it was very interesting to me, too. Also, it spoke to this concept where you see wealth, but you have where Michael was referencing the person who uses it for God and the person who's just gaining mammon. And it looks sometimes that they're the same thing. And so people might say, you know, what does it matter which way you go? You can get wealth. But what we find in the long run is we see where it took Lot and where it takes you. It's the real indication of anything that you do, whether it's spiritually based or material based. And so thank you for this Bible study.
Well, thank you for that answer.
Yeah, that was wonderful. It's so true. You have to, when making a choice, you have to see, well, where is this going to take you? And ultimately, I mean, what happened to Lot's wife?
Pillar of salt.
Yeah. And his own daughters seduced him to be incestuous. So living in Sodom did Lot no good. He certainly did not consult God. There was one article I read, it was entitled, he said there was a book out, and it was called Looking Out for Number One. And I made the point that that's what Lot did. He was looking out for number one. And that is not God's way.
Selfishness in the first degree.
Selfishness, yes. It was all about him. He didn't give a hoot about Abram. I mean, it was really obnoxious. Well, Abram was always
I would say for Lot, it was a smart decision. I mean, it was the better plane, the water and the land itself, you know. But what does that tell us? So, I mean, how many times we face a situation where it looks like it's going to benefit us better in some financial or some other similar way, you know? We can't just make the decision on the human.
Well, it does raise the question, what can you trust from what you learn in school? Right?
Right.
Also, it can look, like might be so attractive, but sometimes you get there by degrees, because first he looked towards Sodom, and then he pitched his tent there, so he was led closer to the attraction because of the prosperity, and then he dwelt there.
Thank you. It ropes you in step by step. A few weeks ago in Science and Health, we had that Adam begins its reign on mortal man mildly, I think it's a paraphrase, but it starts out perfectly logical. Yeah. But you see, all the basis for his wanting to go there was all selfish. He certainly did not consult God. He didn't think about his family. It was all based on his material senses. And it led to disastrous results. Again, Abraham saving him.
I was really surprised at his selfishness. It really surprised me.
I know. It's true. He sounded like he was a spoiled brat. But as Tom said, he could say, he made the intelligent decision. Who wouldn't have taken that?
I'm sure when Abram looked on his side, he saw a beautiful place too. So, I'm sure he didn't think, look what I'm...
From his spiritual sense.
But a different reaction from another person might have been, well, this looks very good, but maybe you want to go there.
Right.
that was a big fact that he never even thanked Abraham. He never said, "Why don't you make the first choice since you got me this far," or anything like that.
True. Those are all really bad signals. So you can ask yourself, because this is how we apply it, how are you making your decisions? Is it all human estimation as to how good the land looks? Oh, this place has really great schools for my kids. See?
But particularly if you're not taking care of whoever you're involved with.
Right.
I also think that it's an opportunity if you make a step and you use your material senses and then you see that it's not right, you can go back or change your mind and retrace your steps. So use it as a learning experience, and maybe Lot should have maybe tried that.
Definitely, that's what Mrs. Eddy did. She found out she made a mistake, she would turn around and change on a dime.
Except she never used her material senses in the first place. She knew better than to base decisions on material sense.
But she would turn as God directed her, so that was good.
She was always listening to God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she knew the result was important, but the intention was more important. And I think it's interesting with Lot. He never got the result, and he didn't have the intention either. And it's fascinating to me that through everything he went through, he didn't just go back to Abram and say, okay, obviously I need help.
Yeah.
So.
I always thought, in the story of the allegory, we mentioned that all the places that were so sinful, they were all these great big rich mansions, weren't they? They weren't any little shacks. They were all big mansions. All that wealth, people puts them to sleep.
The human harmony that looks like human harmony isn't always what it's cracked up to be.
Exactly. Thank you.
Never what it's cracked up to be.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, so I mean, Lot never saw God as the source of all that they had. He never had that appreciation. He never had that deep faith for God's care. And he didn't have the love for others that Abram had. He needed to learn those things. Because that thought would have been a distraction to Abram, because Abram had a mission. I mean, God had something important for Abram to do.
I'm sure if it had been the other way and Abram had to have gone to that area, he would have turned on a dime. He would have left it. There's no way he would have stayed there. In Proverbs it says there is a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads to death. That was the way of Lot. It seemed right to man, to the material senses, but in the end it leads to death. And you can ask yourself, picking out a wife or a husband, if you're just looking for all the physical attributes. There are all kinds of ways. Or certainly picking out homes. What is your basis? What is your motive to where you want to live? It's all selfish and materialistic. Chances are it won't work out well.
Kind of wanted to bring this back to Abram for a minute, where he said what you read before about after Lot had left, that God told Abram to lift up his eyes and look to the place where thou art, north, west, and south, and east. That was the promised land, which is our life in Christ. And God's telling him to walk through it. Walk in the promises of God. Walk through the land, explore the promises of his word. Walk through the landscape of his promises, become familiar with them, and possess them. Abraham possessed it by faith and trusting in the unseen.
Yeah.
And he built put his tent near a mighty oak tree, which is the stability and strength and the promises of God.
Yes.
I'm not saying that as wonderfully as it is, but those are just my thoughts on it. That when God told him to look up, this is the land that I give you, the promised land. It's talking about his life in Christ.
Yeah, he had been so faithful and so obedient. He had such a close relationship with God that God comforted him at a time where he had to make an important decision. Part with Lot, let Lot go on his own to learn his own lesson, and move on. God comforted him.
God comforted him when he finally made that choice to separate.
Exactly.
Come out and be separate. Then he received the fullness of the grace of God.
Exactly.
And through all this, you could see why he had to separate from Lot. Because Lot was so inhuman and selfish and all of those things. He had to, as much as he loved him, he had to separate. As Gary said, for him to learn his lessons and have this human sense, material sense of life burned out of him. And it would have been if he had stayed in Sodom and Gomorrah while it blew up, literally burned out of him. But look at all that he lost. But he had to learn it. There was no other way that he could learn it. And nobody could do it for him. No, not even Abram.
I just wanted to add, because I thought it was very important, interesting, with Sodom. A lot of people think of the sensuality being their great sin, but in many places in the Bible, like Ezekiel, their great sins were pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness, and greed. Mm-hmm. And that's what he turned toward. And I thought it was very apropos today and how to apply this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it
sounds familiar.
Mm-hmm. It does. You see this going on now. See it with these people making millions and millions of dollars and leading a life of Sodom and Gomorrah and having it blow up in their face. It might seem fine for a while, like they're getting away with it, and look at them and wow, 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 but it's not. I read this a little short thing. It was about John and David Livingstone. They were two Scottish brothers. John's aim was to become wealthy. David resolved that he would give no place and no value on anything that I possess unless it is in relationship to the kingdom of God. And many of you know who David Livingstone is, right?
Yes.
Yes. Who is he, Florence?
He went to Africa, did a lot of good, and till this day, they say wherever he went, people remember him, the love that he showed everyone.
Thank you. And it said in the encyclopedia under John Livingston, it just said he was David's brother. So again, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. I chose the less traveled, and it has made all the difference. Robert Frost.
I think David Drummond's book about the greatest thing in the world is he refers to David Livingstone too.
Yes. Remembered all these years for the love, but his choice was based on the kingdom of God, was based all on God, while his brother's choice was me, myself, and I. take care of number one first. Oh, gosh. So there are many lessons to this short part of this story, and it is a pretty short part of the whole story of Abraham. But think of the wealth of lessons that are in it for us.
I was thinking of, even the simple fact of which direction do I go every day. If I'm like Mrs. Eddie's treatment for every day, if I choose to go with the perfection, joyous, triumphant, and complete, my day will be different from, if I started off the day thinking what somebody did to me yesterday. So there's so much in this, really. Thanks for the Bible study.
Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm. We have these choices every day, and believe me, because Abraham was making the right choices day by day by day, when it came to a big choice, he knew exactly what to do. He wasn't like dumbfounded or, what am I to do? How do I know if this is God's voice? Well, he'd been listening to God's voice every single day. And this is what we have the tremendous privilege to do or not to do. So make the right choice. You'll end up in the right place.
Thank you. So thank you, Luann.
Thank you, Luann.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Luann.
Thanks, everybody.